Marcus Hale had served as a king's guard for many years, but even after all that time, he still woke up every morning with the same sense of duty that he had the first day he put on the uniform. He belonged to the royal fortress, a place that stood proudly on a hill, surrounded by tall stone walls and long banners that moved gently with the wind. People from every corner of the kingdom visited the castle, not only to see the king but also to admire the old traditions that had been protected for centuries. One of those traditions was the giant iron chain that hung across the main gate. It was not an ordinary chain. It had been part of the fortress for generations, placed there as a symbol of strength, unity, and protection. Children who visited the castle always stared at it with wide eyes, imagining how strong it must have been to survive so many years. Marcus admired that chain more than most people. To him, it represented everything a guard should be: strong, reliable, and unbroken, even in difficult times. Each morning, before the changing of the guard, Marcus walked slowly toward the gate with his helmet tucked under his arm and his boots tapping lightly on the stone path. He would pause near the chain and take a moment to look at every link. He had made it a personal routine, even though no one officially asked him to check it. He believed a guard should notice things before they turned into problems, and the chain was too important to ignore. During one such morning, when the sun was still low and the air felt cool, Marcus noticed something unusual. He leaned closer, squinting at a particular section of the chain. One of the links looked slightly darker than the rest. He ran his fingers gently over it, and a small bit of rust came off on his fingertips. At first, he told himself it might just be normal aging. After all, the chain was very old. But when he looked again, he realized this was not a small spot. A thin, pale line ran along the metal like a crack trying to hide. Marcus felt a quiet worry settle in his chest. The kingdom's people trusted the castle. They trusted the guards. They trusted the symbols that stood for their safety. If the chain broke, especially during a ceremony when crowds gathered near the gate, someone could get hurt. Even if no one was harmed, the sight of the chain falling would still embarrass the royal household. The king cared deeply about traditions, and the people cared just as much. Marcus straightened himself and decided to report it immediately. He went to the guard commander's office, where several officers were discussing daily tasks. Marcus waited politely until they finished speaking, then explained what he had found. The commander listened carefully, nodding now and then. But when Marcus finished, the response was slower than he expected. The commander agreed it needed to be repaired, but said the maintenance budget had already been stretched thin this season. Repairs involving historical items required special approval from the Royal Council, and that could take days or even weeks. Marcus understood the rules, but he also knew how important the chain was. After his shift that day, Marcus returned to the gate. He looked at the chain again, this time more closely. The crack hadn't widened, but it felt like a warning. The metal was old, and rust never stopped on its own. It would only get worse. Marcus touched the link gently and felt the rough edges where the metal had worn away. He thought about the festivals held at the castle, the large crowds, the children running around, the musicians performing near the gate. What if the chain failed at a moment like that? He didn't want to wait for something bad to happen. That night, while most of the castle grew quiet, Marcus sat in his small chamber. He lit a lantern and opened an old notebook he kept for personal research. He began writing everything he observed about the chain: the size of the link, the depth of the rust, the angle of the crack. He wasn't a blacksmith, but he knew enough about armor and weapons to understand how metal behaved over time. He remembered the stories the older guards had told him when he first joined, how the chain had been forged by skilled craftsmen long ago, how each link was shaped with care, how it survived storms and wars. Marcus respected history, yet he also understood that even the strongest things eventually needed help. The next day, after finishing his duty, he visited a small workshop near the market square. The workshop belonged to an elderly blacksmith named Rowan, who had once repaired royal armor before retiring. Rowan was known for his gentle nature and his deep knowledge of old forging methods. Marcus explained the situation, careful not to reveal details that were restricted by the castle rules. He simply said that a historic chain needed strengthening and asked if Rowan knew anything about repairing large iron links. Rowan rubbed his gray beard and thought for a long moment. Then he nodded and said there were traditional methods for reinforcing old metal without altering its shape. He showed Marcus some tools and techniques, including a special clamp that could temporarily hold metal together while preventing further damage. Marcus listened closely, taking mental notes. Rowan warned him that working with ancient metal required patience. "You don't fight old metal," Rowan said kindly. "You help it remember what it used to be." Those words stayed with Marcus. Every day after that, Marcus used his free time to learn more. He practiced with spare pieces of iron in the castle's workshop, carefully testing the clamps and studying how pressure changed the strength of a chain. He spoke with the castle's stable master, who had experience repairing old wagons, and even consulted a carpenter familiar with wooden supports. Marcus wanted to understand every detail before he made a move. All the while, the small crack in the chain lingered in his thoughts. He checked it daily, hoping it hadn't grown. Sometimes it looked unchanged. Other times it seemed slightly worse. He wasn't sure if that was just his imagination or real progress of the damage, but each time he looked at it, his concern deepened. Some of the younger guards noticed Marcus spending more time near the gate and whispered among themselves. They admired him, but didn't always understand his seriousness. One guard asked him why he cared so much about an old chain when there were bigger problems in the world. Marcus simply smiled and said, "If we ignore the small things, they grow into big things." His calm reply left an impression. Even though he tried to stay quiet about his worries, a few castle staff members eventually learned that Marcus had concerns about the chain. Some told him gently that attempting repairs without official permission might get him into trouble. They didn't want him to risk his position. Marcus appreciated their concern but felt a responsibility stronger than fear of consequences. A guard did not look away from danger, even if that danger seemed small or hidden. As days passed, he noticed more details: the sound the chain made when the wind pushed it, the slight movement of the drawbridge, the weight it carried. He studied all of it. And with every observation, he became more certain that he needed to do something before it was too late. Though he stood strong and calm as always, inside him grew a quiet determination. The kingdom trusted him. The people trusted him. And he wanted to honor that trust. Even if no one else saw the danger yet, Marcus saw it clearly. The chain was more than metal. It was a promise of safety and history, a reminder of unity. And Marcus Hale refused to let that promise break. He decided he would find a way to protect it, even if he had to work alone. Marcus woke up early the next morning with a restless feeling in his chest. Even though he had tried to sleep, his mind kept returning to the cracked link in the chain. The faint line in the metal felt like a quiet warning, a reminder that something important needed attention. He dressed in his guard uniform, secured his belt, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The castle courtyard was peaceful, with only a few birds singing and some servants preparing for the day. But inside Marcus, there was a sense of urgency growing stronger every moment. When he reached the gate, he examined the chain again before beginning his duties. The crack was still there, thin but clear. He ran his fingertip over it gently. The cold metal felt weaker than it should. He imagined how the chain once looked when it was new, strong, polished, and full of pride. Now it looked tired, as if the years had weighed down on it. Marcus stepped back and let out a slow breath. Waiting for official repairs felt risky. He knew the delay could make things worse. Soon the castle began to fill with activity. Traders arrived with carts full of supplies, servants hurried around with baskets, and other guards gathered to start their shifts. Marcus tried to focus on his normal duties, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the chain. Even when he participated in the guard rotation, he found himself glancing toward the gate whenever he had the chance. Later that day, he went to the commander again, hoping there might be progress. The commander listened, but his answer was the same: repairs required approval. And approvals took time. Marcus left the office feeling disappointed. He respected the rules, yet he felt stuck between duty and waiting. As he walked back toward the gate, one of the younger guards, a cheerful man named Alden, approached him. "You've been staring at that chain for days," Alden said playfully. "Is it telling you secrets?" Quote. Marcus smiled a little but didn't laugh. "It's telling me something important," he replied softly. Then he explained the crack, the rust, and the risk it might cause. Alden's smile faded as Marcus spoke. "I didn't know it was that bad," Alden said. "Should we tell more people?" "I already tried," Marcus said. "But there are rules. Repairs take time to approve." Alden nodded slowly. "Then what will you do?" Marcus looked at the chain again. "I'll do what I can." As the day went on, Marcus began noticing small details he had never paid much attention to before. Whenever the drawbridge was raised or lowered, the chain shifted slightly. The gatekeepers had been using the chain carefully, but the repeated movement still put pressure on it. Marcus watched closely each time, trying to judge how much weight the chain could still carry. During the afternoon, a group of visitors entered the castle, families, travelers, and children excited to see the fortress. Some children ran toward the gate and touched the chain, laughing and pointing at its large links. Marcus felt a wave of concern. If the chain suddenly gave way, the children would be standing right beneath it. With that thought, the need for immediate action grew even stronger inside him. After completing his shift, Marcus walked into the courtyard, where the castle workers stored tools and equipment. He asked one of the stable masters, a kind man named Drew, if there were any extra clamps or metal supports available. Drew raised an eyebrow and asked, "What do you need them for?" Marcus replied carefully, "To prevent something from getting worse." Drew didn't question him further. He trusted Marcus. He handed over a few strong clamps and wished him luck. Marcus carried the tools to a quiet corner of the courtyard. He placed them down and examined each one, testing their strength. He wasn't planning to replace the entire chain that would require professional blacksmiths, but he could stop the crack from spreading. He could reduce the danger until proper repairs happened. That evening, as the sun began to set and most people returned to their quarters, Marcus returned to the gate. He stood in front of the chain, holding the tools he had gathered. The chain hung calmly in the soft orange light, as if waiting for him. Marcus took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "One small step at a time." He started by inspecting the cracked link more closely. The crack was not too wide yet, but it ran deeper than he had first thought. Marcus used a small brush to clean away loose rust around the area. The sound of metal brushing against metal echoed in the quiet courtyard. He worked patiently, making sure not to damage the chain further. When the surface was clean, the crack became even more visible, like a thin line running along the curve of the link. Marcus then positioned one of the clamps around the weakened area. He tightened it slowly, making sure the pressure was just right. Too much pressure could worsen the crack, but too little pressure would make the repair useless. His hands moved carefully, guided by experience and the advice Rowan had given him. After securing the clamp, Marcus tested its hold by gently tugging on the link. It stayed firm. He attached a second clamp for extra support. While he worked, he felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He knew he wasn't trained for big repairs, but he wasn't trying to replace the chain. He was trying to protect it. He believed that sometimes doing something small at the right time made all the difference. When he stepped back to look at his work, the chain looked safer, but he didn't feel entirely calm. The clamps would help, but the rest of the chain still needed attention. He needed more information. He needed to understand how badly the other links had been affected over the years. Over the next few days, Marcus made it his mission to study the entire chain. Whenever he found a moment between shifts, he examined another section. Some links were perfectly fine, strong, and solid. Others showed signs of aging, light rust, worn edges, or small dents from years of pressure. Marcus took note of everything, drawing sketches in his notebook and writing down observations. A few castle workers noticed what he was doing. Some whispered curiously. A few approached him directly, offering advice or asking if he needed help. Marcus thanked them politely but explained he needed to handle it carefully. Too many hands could cause mistakes. One afternoon, while Marcus was inspecting the upper part of the chain using a small ladder, an older servant named Lysa walked by. She had been working at the castle for many years and knew its stories well. She stopped and watched Marcus for a moment before saying, "You remind me of the old guards who used to take care of this place. They used to say that every piece of the castle has a spirit. If we care for it, it cares for us." Marcus paused and smiled gently. "Maybe that's true," he said. "The chain has been protecting the gate for a very long time. I think it deserves the same care in return." Lisa nodded. "I'm glad someone still thinks that way." Marcus continued his work, feeling encouraged by her words. But as the week went by, he realized that the damage might be worse than he expected. One evening, as he studied the chain under lantern light, he noticed another link, with a faint sign of wear. It wasn't cracked yet, but it looked dangerously thin in one spot. Marcus frowned, understanding that the problem wasn't just one link, it was age. The entire chain had been carrying the weight of the drawbridge and gate for years. It had done its job faithfully. But nothing lasted forever. That realization made Marcus even more determined. He couldn't repair everything alone. But he could slow the damage. He could protect the chain long enough for the Royal Council to approve the official repairs. He could keep people safe. By now, some of the guards had begun taking Marcus's worries more seriously. They saw him working quietly every day, doing his best without asking for praise or recognition. Alden sometimes joined him, handing him tools or holding a lantern. Others kept their distance but watched respectfully. One evening, Alden asked him, "Why do you care so much? Why put in all this effort when you could just wait for someone else to fix it?" Marcus took a moment before answering, "Because this is my duty. Not just to follow orders, but to protect this place and its people. Even if the danger is small. Even if no one else sees it. I can't ignore it." Alden nodded slowly, finally understanding. But as Marcus continued to study the chain, a troubling thought grew in his mind. What if the official repairs didn't come in time? What if the chain reached its limit before help arrived? That fear pushed him to act faster. He returned to Rowan the blacksmith to learn more techniques, asking for advice on reinforcing old metal without replacing it. Rowan showed him how to use supportive frames and how to position extra pieces of metal safely. Marcus practiced every technique carefully. As Marcus learned more, he became aware that the cracked link wasn't the only danger. The hidden corrosion inside some of the links could cause sudden failure, and sudden failure could lead to injuries or chaos. The chain was running out of time. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier each day. He had already done what he could to slow the damage, but now he understood that the problem was not just one weak link. Many parts of the chain were old and tired. Even though his clamps and small fixes helped for the moment, they were not enough to solve everything. Still, Marcus refused to give up. He believed that if he kept working, he could keep the chain safe until the official repairs happened. But deep inside, he also knew the real challenge had just begun. Every morning, he checked the cracked link first. The clamps he had placed still held it together, and that gave him a small sense of relief. But he noticed the chain made a soft creaking sound now and then. A sound that hadn't been there before. It was quiet, almost easy to miss, but Marcus heard it clearly. Years of training had sharpened his senses. He knew the chain was under stress, and stress spread silently. During his breaks, Marcus sat near the gate and studied how the chain moved when the drawbridge shifted. He watched the way each link handled pressure, and how the weight traveled from one link to the next. Sometimes he closed his eyes and tried to imagine how the chain looked inside, where the metal was strong, where it was weak, where it needed support. He treated the chain like a puzzle, one he needed to understand completely. One day, while he was examining a section near the top, Alden walked over, holding a piece of bread and a cup of warm soup. "You've barely eaten today," Alden said with concern. "Take a break, Marcus." Marcus accepted the soup but didn't stop studying the chain. "Thank you," he said softly. "I just need to figure out how to stop the damage from spreading." Alden looked at the chain thoughtfully. "Can't you use more clamps?" Like the ones you used on the cracked link? I can, Marcus replied. But clamps are temporary. They help, but they don't fix the real issue. The metal inside is thinning. If one link fails, the others will feel the pressure. That's when things can go wrong. Alden nodded, understanding the seriousness. Is there anything else you can do? Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the chain for a long moment, then said, maybe. But it will take careful work. Over the next several days, Marcus studied old books from the castle library. Some were dusty and filled with sketches of ancient tools. Others described how early castle builders had strengthened metal structures. Marcus took notes, copied diagrams, and tried to understand every method he could. He knew he couldn't replace the chain, but maybe he could reinforce it little by little, just enough to keep it safe. At night, when the castle was quiet, Marcus practiced the techniques on spare metal pieces in the workshop. He learned how to spread weight evenly across weak areas, how to use small metal plates to support thinning sections, and how to tighten clamps in a way that didn't stress the surrounding links. Rowan the blacksmith gave him more tools and more advice. Rowan's hands shook slightly from age, but his knowledge was steady and clear. You don't force the metal, Rowan reminded him. You guide it. You add support where it is tired. Slow work is strong work. Marcus nodded each time, repeating the words to himself like a quiet promise. One afternoon, after studying the chain closely, Marcus found something troubling. Near the center of the chain, one link had a shallow dent. It wasn't a crack, but dents could turn into cracks over time. The dent made Marcus uneasy because that section of the chain carried a lot of weight. If the dent grew deeper, the link might give in unexpectedly. He touched the dent lightly with his fingertips. The metal felt thinner here than in other places. He needed to reinforce it. He carefully attached a small support plate around it, something he had practiced many times on spare metal. The plate fit well, hugging the link like a protective shell, but something else worried him more. As he stepped on a small stool to reach the upper parts of the chain, he noticed a faint line near another link. It wasn't as deep as the first crack, but it was definitely the beginning of something. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Another weak spot, another warning. This second crack made him realize that the chain was aging faster than he expected. We don't have much time, he whispered to himself. That night, Marcus returned to Rowan's workshop to learn one more technique, how to use a reinforcement ring. It was a strong metal ring that could fit around a link, strengthening it from the outside. Rowan warned him that fitting a ring required patience. You must heat it just right, Rowan explained. Not too hot, or it will shrink too quickly. Not too cold, or it won't grip tightly. Marcus practiced the technique several times until he could do it smoothly. When he finally succeeded, Rowan smiled warmly. You have the hands of a craftsman now, he said, not just a guard. Marcus appreciated the compliment, but he knew he had no time to be proud. The chain needed help, and it needed it soon. The next morning, Marcus returned to the gate early. The sky was still pale and quiet. He examined the second crack and decided to use a reinforcement ring. He heated the ring carefully, just as Rowan had taught him. When it was ready, he placed it around the link and tightened it gently. The ring fit perfectly, adding strength without damaging the original metal. Alden arrived during the process and watched in quiet amazement. Where did you learn all this? From Rowan, Marcus replied. And from the old books. I have to try everything I can. Alden nodded. The other guards are talking. They say you're working harder than anyone they've seen. Marcus gave a small smile. I'm just doing what needs to be done. But despite all his progress, Marcus could not shake the feeling that something big was coming. He felt it in the way the chain creaked, in the way the drawbridge pulled at it, in the way the wind made it sway. The chain was holding on, but it was tired. A few days later, the castle announced that a major public event would take place soon. Visitors from all over the kingdom would come to see the ceremony. Marcus felt a wave of concern wash over him. Crowds near the gate meant more pressure on the chain, more movement, more risk. He immediately went to the commander again. "We need the repairs as soon as possible," Marcus urged. "The chain won't last long with all the activity coming." The commander sighed, looking tired. "I understand your concern, Marcus, but the council has not yet approved the repairs. We must follow the process." Marcus left the office feeling more worried than ever. He didn't want to break rules. He didn't want to ignore the chain's condition. And he certainly didn't want anyone to be in danger. That evening, he stood alone by the gate, watching the chain sway gently in the cool breeze. The lantern light made the metal glow softly. Marcus felt a mix of sadness and determination. He wished he could do more. He wished he could finish fixing it completely. But he wasn't a master blacksmith, and time was running out. Still, he refused to give up. He planned out his next steps carefully. He would inspect the chain one more time from end to end. He would strengthen any link that seemed even slightly weak. He would reposition clamps to add more support. He would adjust the reinforcement rings to ensure they were tight. He would stay close to the gate during the event, watching the chain every second. Marcus knew he might not be able to fix everything, but he could be ready. He spent the next few days quietly working, strengthening every vulnerable point he could find. He worked with calm hands, steady breathing, and patient movements. Each action felt like adding one more layer of safety, one more moment of protection. By the end of the week, Marcus had done everything within his power. The chain was still old, still fragile, but stronger than before. He could only hope it would hold. And with the big public event only a day away, Marcus felt a quiet storm building inside him, a sense that something important was about to happen. Something that would test everything he had worked for, and he was determined to be ready for it. The morning of the important public event arrived with bright sunlight and excited energy in the air. People from villages, towns, and faraway places began gathering outside the castle long before the gates opened. The event was special. The king would make a grand appearance, and the drawbridge would be raised and lowered several times during the ceremony. It was a moment of pride for the kingdom, something families looked forward to every year. But for Marcus, it felt like a test he had been preparing for over many days. He stood near the gate in full uniform, helmet polished, boots cleaned, and his expression calm. But inside his chest, his heart felt heavier than his armor. His eyes kept drifting toward the chain, the giant iron links that had carried the weight of history for generations. He had spent weeks inspecting it, reinforcing it, and supporting it in every way he could. Yet he knew the truth: no amount of temporary fixes could replace the strength of new metal. Alden came up beside him, carrying his spear. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Marcus forced a small smile. "I'm ready," he said. "I just hope the chain is too." The crowds continued to grow. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to see over the people in front of them. Merchants sold little flags with the royal symbol. Musicians prepared their instruments. The entire courtyard buzzed with excitement. But the busier the castle grew, the more uneasy Marcus felt. He stayed close to the chain, watching every movement, listening to every sound. Soon the preparation horn sounded, signaling that the ceremony would begin shortly. The gatekeepers moved into position to raise and lower the drawbridge during the king's entrance. Marcus watched them carefully. Even small movements could shift the weight of the chain. Slowly, Marcus whispered under his breath, though the gatekeepers could not hear him. The drawbridge began to rise for the first practice run. The chain tightened slightly. Marcus noticed one reinforcement ring pressing harder than usual. He stepped closer, studying the connection. The chain creaked louder than before. His breath caught. He knew that sound too well. It was the kind of sound metal made when it was stressed beyond comfort. He leaned forward and gently pressed the reinforced link. It felt firm, but the vibration passing through it felt wrong. It was like the metal was speaking a warning that only he could hear. Alden noticed the tension in Marcus's posture. "Something's wrong?" he whispered. Marcus didn't look away from the chain. "Maybe. Stay alert." The king's appearance was moments away. The gatekeepers lowered the drawbridge again. The entire structure shifted, the chain swaying slightly. Marcus took a deep breath and hoped it would hold just a bit longer. The royal horn echoed across the courtyard, signaling that the king was approaching. The crowd cheered. People waved their flags. Musicians lifted their instruments. Everything was moving quickly now. Marcus felt a sharp jolt through the metal link like a heart skipping a beat. Then he heard it. A sudden, loud crack. Not big enough to break the chain completely, but loud enough to freeze Marcus in place. He reacted instantly. "Everyone step back," he shouted, his voice rising above the noise. Alden and 2 other guards looked at him with alarm. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. Some people hesitated. Marcus dashed forward and raised his hands, signaling everyone to move away from the gate. "Back! Move back now," he ordered, louder this time. His voice carried authority, and the guards helped guide the crowds away. People stepped back quickly, confusion spreading through the audience. Marcus turned toward the chain and saw the problem. The second crack he had found earlier had widened under the pressure of the drawbridge's movement. The reinforcement ring he had placed around the link was holding, but only barely. A few more seconds, and the metal might slip past its support. He knew he had no time to wait for anyone else. He rushed to the chain, placing his hands firmly on the reinforced link. He felt the vibration traveling through the metal, fast, strong, and unsteady. The pressure was increasing as the drawbridge continued to move. He called out to the gatekeepers, "Stop the drawbridge! Stop it now!" The gatekeepers heard the urgency in his voice and stopped the mechanism immediately. The drawbridge froze in place, halfway between up and down, but stopping it didn't remove the pressure. Now the chain was stuck, holding an awkward angle, bearing more weight on certain links than usual. Marcus acted fast. He grabbed the extra clamp hanging from his belt, the clamp he carried every day just in case. His hands moved quickly, guided by days of preparation. He positioned the clamp over the spreading crack and tightened it with all the strength he had. The metal groaned loudly. And for a moment, Marcus feared the chain would snap right in his hands. But the clamp held. The vibration slowed slightly. Alden hurried to Marcus's side. "What do you need?" "Hold the chain steady," Marcus said, pushing with all his strength. Alden grabbed the chain with him, and together they tried to keep it from shifting. Another guard ran forward. "Should we call the engineers?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "We must keep the pressure steady first." The crowd watched anxiously from a safe distance. The music stopped. The cheering faded. Everyone held their breath, confused but trusting the guards to handle the situation. The chain groaned again, and for a moment, Marcus felt it slipping. He gripped tighter, his arms shaking from the effort. He thought about the many days he had spent studying the chain, the nights he spent learning reinforcement techniques, the hours he spent supporting each weak point. He couldn't let all that effort be for nothing. He adjusted the clamp, tightening it further. The metal's trembling slowed. The link steadied, slowly, carefully. The reinforcement ring settled into place, fitting more securely as the clamp tightened around it. Alden let out a sigh of relief. "It's holding. Marcus. It's holding." Marcus didn't relax. He looked along the entire chain, making sure no other links were failing. He checked the clamps he had placed earlier. He listened for any more worrying sounds. Only after a long moment did he finally take a deep breath. "It's stable for now," Marcus said softly. The commander rushed to the gate. "Marcus, what happened?" Marcus stepped back from the chain, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "The chain is too old," he said. "The pressure during the ceremony caused the cracks to spread. But we've stopped it for now." The commander inspected the chain and nodded, understanding the seriousness. "You prevented an accident," he said. "We'll keep the gate closed and bring the engineers immediately." Marcus nodded. His arms still trembled slightly from the effort, but he felt relieved knowing he had acted quickly. The crowd, now calmer, watched with admiration. Some clapped softly, realizing that Marcus had protected them from something dangerous. Even the children who earlier touched the chain looked at him with wide, respectful eyes. Alden patted Marcus on the shoulder. "You saved the day." Marcus shook his head gently. "I just did my duty." The commander placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did more than that. You prevented a disaster." As the engineers arrived and began inspecting the chain, Marcus stepped aside. His heart still beat fast, but his mind was calm now. He had done everything he could. His quick actions had kept everyone safe. He looked at the chain once more, the symbol he had respected since the day he joined the King's Guard. It had been a long battle to protect it. And today, that battle reached its peak. It wasn't just metal he had been guarding. It was the trust of the entire kingdom. And for Marcus, that meant everything. Marcus stood quietly near the gate after the engineers arrived, watching them carefully inspect every part of the chain. He felt tired, yet deeply relieved. For weeks he had worked alone, listening to the chain's silent warnings, noticing tiny details everyone else missed, and doing everything in his power to protect the castle. Now, with the chain stable and the danger under control, he finally allowed himself to breathe. The crisis had passed. But the story wasn't over. The public event had been paused, and the king's appearance delayed. People waited patiently at a safe distance, talking in quiet voices about what had just happened. Many of them had not understood the danger, but they had seen Marcus rush toward the chain with such urgency that it left a strong impression. Some whispered that he had saved the day. Others said they had never seen a guard move with such purpose. Children pointed at him with admiration, telling their parents he was brave. Alden came to stand beside Marcus. "You look exhausted," he said softly. Marcus nodded. "I'm all right. I just need a moment." "Cray today. Cray today. You deserve more than a moment," Alden replied with a proud smile. Before Marcus could answer, the commander approached with 2 engineers. They held notes and sketches, and their faces were serious. One of the engineers spoke first. "Your actions prevented a major problem. The chain has several weak points. If you hadn't added supports, one of the links might have snapped today." Marcus listened quietly, his heart heavy with both relief and concern. "It needs full repairs," he said. "Temporary fixes won't hold forever." "And you were right to warn us," the commander added, sounding ashamed. "We should have listened sooner." Marcus shook his head politely. "You followed the rules. I understand. But the chain doesn't follow rules. It follows time." The commander sighed. "Even so, you showed great responsibility. You saw the danger before anyone else." A few minutes later, a royal messenger hurried over. "The king is asking for an update," he announced. "He wishes to know what happened." The commander nodded. "Tell him everything is under control thanks to Marcus Hale." The messenger glanced at Marcus with respect before rushing back toward the inner courtyard. Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. "I was only doing my duty," he said. "Duty," Alden replied softly. "But also heart. And not everyone has that." The engineers continued inspecting the chain. After a long discussion, they decided the chain must be taken down and rebuilt as soon as possible. They recommended closing the gate temporarily and using another entrance for visitors until the repairs were finished. The commander turned to Marcus. "You will stay near the gate until the engineers complete their assessment. Your knowledge of the weak spots will help them." Marcus nodded, ready to assist. Though tired, he still felt responsible for the old chain. He walked with the engineers, pointing out every place he had noticed rust or pressure marks. He showed them the drawings he had made in his notebook, surprising them with how detailed each sketch was. "You studied the chain more closely than anyone else," one engineer said with appreciation. "I had to," Marcus replied. "It was speaking to me in its own way." Hours passed as the engineers finished their evaluation. When they were done, they thanked Marcus before returning to their workshop to prepare the restoration plan. The chain would be carefully taken down the next morning and replaced with a stronger one that honored the original design. With the danger gone and the crowd reassured, the king finally made his appearance not in a grand ceremony as planned, but in a calm and respectful manner. The king was a wise and observant man, and he had already heard much about Marcus's actions. He walked toward the gate with a gentle smile. Marcus immediately straightened, standing tall. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing respectfully. The king studied him for a moment before speaking. "Marcus Hale, I have heard that your quick thinking and dedication protected our people today. Marcus lowered his head humbly. "I only did what I believed was necessary, Your Majesty." The king shook his head kindly. "You did more than necessary. You took responsibility when others hesitated. You worked quietly, not for praise, but for safety. And you reminded us that even the strongest symbols require care." The king placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You have my gratitude." Marcus felt his chest warm with emotion. It wasn't the medals or the recognition he valued, it was the acknowledgement that someone understood his intentions. The king continued, "You will be honored at the next council gathering, and I want you to assist the engineers during the chain's full restoration. Your knowledge is too valuable to be overlooked." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "I would be honored, Your Majesty." After the king left, many castle workers approached Marcus to thank him. Some offered handshakes, others kind smiles, and a few simply nodded in respect. Even people from the crowd stepped forward, expressing their gratitude before heading home. Marcus felt overwhelmed but grateful for their kindness. Later that evening, when the castle grew quiet again, Marcus returned to the gate alone. The lantern light cast soft shadows over the chain. He stepped close and gently touched the reinforced link. The metal was cool beneath his fingers, steady and quiet. He whispered softly, "You've done well for many years. Tomorrow, you'll finally get the care you deserve." He stood for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened. He remembered the first day he joined the guard, when he had admired the chain, not just as metal, but as a symbol. He remembered checking it each morning, just as part of his routine. He remembered the first time he saw the small crack, the worry that had grown inside him, and the long hours he spent studying and learning how to protect it. He remembered the moment when the chain came close to breaking and how he had acted without hesitation. But most of all, he remembered why he had done it. It wasn't for reward. It wasn't for recognition. It was because he believed in protecting what mattered: people, history, and the symbols that held the kingdom together. As he walked back toward his chamber, Alden caught up with him. "Heading in?" Alden asked. "Yes," Marcus replied, with a tired smile. "It's been a long day." Alden chuckled. "A long day, and a heroic one. Everyone's talking about you." Marcus shook his head gently. "They'll forget by tomorrow." "No," Alden said firmly. "Not this time. You didn't just hold a chain together. You held the kingdom's trust together." Marcus paused at the doorway, thoughtful. "Maybe, but I just did what felt right. And that's exactly why people remember," Alden replied. That night, Marcus slept deeply for the first time in weeks. He didn't wake with worry or fear. Instead, he rested, knowing he had given everything he had. And the next morning, when the engineers arrived to begin the full restoration, Marcus was there to help, steady, calm, and ready. In the days that followed, he guided them through the process, making sure every detail honored the original chain. When the new chain was finally installed, strong and shining in the sunlight, Marcus felt proud not because of fame or praise, but because he knew the legacy was safe. Whispers around the castle soon gave him a new title: the guard who held the kingdom's pride together. It wasn't official, but to Marcus, it meant everything. He returned to his post with renewed purpose, standing tall, watching over the gate he loved so much. And though the new chain no longer carried the same cracks or rust, Marcus still checked it every morning quietly, faithfully, just like he always had. For him, guarding wasn't just a job, it was a promise he would keep for as long as he stood watch.